The story of Alaska begins long before the world ever gave this vast frontier a name, and our journey opens with a sweeping shot across endless snowy horizons where the mountains rise like ancient guardians, and the coastline meets the icy Pacific with a relentless roar. In this land, silence has a voice echoing through frozen forests, towering glaciers, and the deep cold waters where whales migrate beneath sheets of mist. But behind this breathtaking beauty lies a history filled with struggle, exploration, survival, and transformation. As our camera drifts over abandoned gold rush trails, rusted military bunkers remote, tribal villages, and the endless wilderness that has swallowed the footsteps of countless generations, we uncover a story far older than the United States, older than the Russian Empire, older even than recorded time. Indigenous peoples thrived here for thousands of years, mastering the oceans, the wildlife, and the harsh climate with unmatched resilience and cultural wisdom. Then came explorers, traders, missionaries, soldiers, miners, an opportunist siege group, leaving behind marks that would reshape Alaska forever. Empires fought silently for control, fortunes were won and lost overnight, and entire communities rose from frozen ground, only to disappear just as quickly. Yet through every chapter of conflict and change, Alaska remained a land too massive to conquer, too wild to tame. Today, as we peel back each layer of its past, from ancient migrations across Beringia to the Russian fur trade, from the gold rush to World War II battles, from the pipeline era to modern statehood, we discover how Alaska became one of the most mysterious, strategic, and culturally rich corners of the world. This is the hidden story of America's last frontier, and it begins long before the first map ever dared to draw its boundaries. For thousands of years before a single ship touched its shores, Alaska was already alive with cultures, traditions, and thriving communities. The land that many imagine today as empty or untouched was, in fact, a network of societies built on deep respect for nature and remarkable survival skills. Indigenous peoples such as the Inupiat, Yup'ik, Aleut, Tlingit, Haida, Ayak, Athabaskan, and Tsimshian lived across vast regions, each developing their own languages, beliefs, and technologies adapted to their specific environments. Along the coasts, expert hunters navigated frigid waters in handcrafted kayaks and umiaks, tracking whales, seals, and sea lions with techniques passed down through generations. In the forests and interior, others followed caribou migrations, trapped fur animals, and built seasonal camps that balanced mobility with community life. These early societies created complex art, intricate weaving, ceremonial masks, and wood carvings that reflected deep spiritual connections to animals and ancestors. Trade routes stretched for hundreds of miles, linking villages through bartering networks that shared not only resources but stories, songs, and alliances. Their understanding of the seasons, the tides, and the behavior of wildlife was so advanced that it allowed them to survive where many outsiders later struggled. Their worldview saw humans as part of a larger natural system, not rulers of it, and this philosophy guided every decision from hunting to family life to spiritual practice. When later explorers arrived, they were often surprised to find communities that were organized, skilled, and deeply rooted in tradition. Alaska's history cannot begin with maps or governments. It begins with these people, whose presence and heritage remain a central part of the state's identity today. Their knowledge shaped the first human story of Alaska, and their resilience set the foundation for all the chapters that followed. Alaska's earliest chapter stretches back almost 20,000 years. During the last ice age, when glaciers locked much of the world in frozen silence, at that time, sea levels were far lower than they are today, revealing a massive landmass between Siberia and Alaska, known as Beringia. This vast grassland, stretching hundreds of miles, was not a barren wasteland but a rich ecosystem filled with mammoths, bison, prehistoric horses, wolves, and early human communities. Many scientists believe that ancestors of modern indigenous peoples crossed this land bridge while following animal herds, slowly settling across regions that would one day become Alaska, Canada, and the rest of the Americas. Their journey was not a single wave, but a process that unfolded over thousands of years. Families moved gradually, establishing seasonal camps, adapting their tools, and learning to read the harsh northern environment. Over time, they developed unique hunting strategies, crafting spears, scrapers, and bone tools that could withstand extreme cold. The land bridge itself was more than a migration path. It was a homeland where cultures formed, stories began, and human resilience was tested. When the climate eventually warmed, glaciers melted, and rising oceans swallowed Beringia beneath the Bering Strait, permanently separating Asia and North America. But the people who had crossed remained, evolving into the diverse indigenous nations that populate Alaska today. Their languages, traditions, and survival systems each hold traces of this ancient journey. Modern archaeology continues to uncover tools, bones, and artifacts confirming their deep roots in the region. This migration is not just a scientific theory, it is a story of courage, adaptation, and discovery. It marks the beginning of Alaska's human timeline, long before borders, empires, or maps existed. It is the moment when humans first claimed the northern edge of the world as home. The next major turning point in Alaska's history came in the 18th century, when Russian explorers set their eyes on the northern Pacific. At the time, Russia was eager to expand its influence and discover new resources. In 1741, Danish navigator Vitus Bering, sailing under the Russian flag, led an expedition that officially brought Alaska onto European maps. When the crew reported the abundance of sea otters known for their incredibly valuable pelts, Russian traders and hunters rushed to the region. This sparked a booming but often brutal fur trade. Russian Promyshleniki, or fur hunters, established camps across the Aleutian Islands and coastal Alaska. Their arrival deeply affected indigenous communities. Some encounters were cooperative, involving trade and shared knowledge, but others were harsh and exploitative. Many native groups suffered under forced labor, violence, and diseases brought by the newcomers. The Russians built small settlements, the most famous being Sitka, which became the capital of Russian America. Orthodox missionaries arrived as well, creating schools and churches, and some attempted to protect indigenous people from abuses, though results varied. Despite Russia's ambition, Alaska proved difficult to manage. It was far from the Russian mainland, expensive to supply, and vulnerable to competition from British and American traders who were expanding their influence along the Pacific coast. As the fur population declined due to overhunting, Russia's interest weakened. Still, their presence left a permanent mark. Names, architecture, and the continued presence of Russian Orthodox communities survive today. The Russian era introduced Alaska to global attention, but it also set in motion the events that would lead to its transfer to another power. Russia's grip on Alaska was never strong, and by the mid-1800s, the empire faced a critical decision: hold on to its distant territory, or let it go before rivals claimed it. By 1799, Russia realized it needed a more organized system to control Alaska's resources. The solution was the Russian-American Company, a government-backed monopoly with authority to manage trade, establish settlements, and enforce Russian rule. Led by powerful governors like Alexander Baronov, the company expanded rapidly along Alaska's coast. They built forts, trading posts, and shipyards, turning Sitka into a bustling administrative center. Baronov negotiated alliances with some indigenous groups, while clashing with others, as both sides struggled to protect their people and resources. The company attempted to create a functioning colony by encouraging Russian families, craftsmen, and workers to settle in the region. But harsh weather, isolation, and limited support from Moscow made long-term settlement difficult. Many Russians stayed only temporarily. Meanwhile, indigenous communities faced continued pressures: disease outbreaks, disruptions to traditional hunting grounds, and conflicts over control of the fur trade. The Russian-American Company also struggled financially. Transportation was expensive, supply lines stretched thousands of miles, and profits dropped as sea otter populations declined. British and American traders increasingly challenged Russian control, sometimes bypassing taxes or trading illegally with Alaska natives. By the 1850s, Russia began to question whether Alaska was worth the cost. Russia feared losing Alaska to Britain in a conflict and needed funds after the Crimean War strained its economy. The company's power weakened, and Moscow shifted its attention elsewhere. Eventually, the idea of selling Alaska emerged not as a sign of defeat, but as a strategic move. Russia knew it could not defend Alaska in future wars, and the United States appeared as a friendly nation with growing interest in the Pacific. The stage was set for one of the most surprising real estate transactions in world history. In 1867, an event took place that would forever reshape the future of North America. The United States purchased Alaska from Russia for $6 $7.2 million deal orchestrated by U.S. Secretary of State William H. Seward. At the time, many Americans mocked the decision, calling Alaska Seward's folly, Seward's icebox, and a wasteland of ice and polar bears. They believed the U.S. had wasted money on a frozen, empty territory with no real value. What they didn't know was that Seward had a bold vision. He believed the United States would one day play a major role in Pacific trade, and that Alaska's strategic location would be invaluable. The negotiations were surprisingly smooth. Russia, facing financial problems and fearing British expansion, was eager to sell. The U.S., recovering from the Civil War, was ready to expand westward again. On March 30, 1867, both nations signed the treaty. That October, in a ceremony in Sitka, Russian soldiers lowered their flag and American troops raised the Stars and Stripes, officially transferring the territory. But the transition was far from simple. Indigenous peoples were not consulted or compensated, and the U.S. government had no clear plan for governing the massive region. Alaska lacked infrastructure, settlers, and basic law enforcement. For the next several years, the U.S. military, customs officials, and short-term administrators took turns controlling the region. Despite early challenges, the purchase would later prove to be one of the greatest deals in American history. Under the ice and soil lay vast forests, fisheries, minerals, and eventually, enormous reserves of oil. Seward's vision was far ahead of his time, and though many doubted him, Alaska would eventually become a pillar of American wealth, defense, and identity. After the Alaska Purchase, the United States quickly discovered that owning the territory was far different from managing it. For years, Alaska lacked any stable form of government. The region was ruled initially by the U.S. Army, then by the Treasury Department, and later by the Navy. Each group struggled with limited resources, minimal personnel, and almost no infrastructure. Lawlessness became common, especially in remote settlements where disputes over trapping, fishing, or mining often turned violent because there was no clear legal authority. Towns were scattered and small, and travel between them was dangerous and slow. Most Americans weren't interested in moving to Alaska, considering it too cold, too far, and too wild. Yet change was coming. Whalers began to establish temporary stations along the coast, trading with indigenous peoples for supplies. Missionaries arrived, building schools and churches while influencing social and cultural practices. Some brought education and medical care, while others imposed strict rules that disrupted traditional ways of life. As decades passed, small communities grew around natural resource sites. Logging operations emerged in the southeast. Cannery towns formed along salmon-rich rivers, and traders traveled rivers and coasts, creating early economic networks. Indigenous communities faced increasing challenges: loss of land, restrictions on traditions, and diseases introduced by outsiders. Despite these hardships, many upheld their languages, ceremonies, and leadership structures. By the late 1800s, Alaska had gained enough population and economic activity for the U.S. government to consider formal territorial status, though it would still take decades. Alaska was beginning to attract dreamers, adventurers, opportunists, and those seeking a new start. And soon, one discovery would change everything, turning the quiet frontier into a booming, chaotic, and world-famous destination. In 1896, a single discovery set off one of the most dramatic human migrations in North American history. Gold was found in the Klondike region of Canada, just east of Alaska. News spread slowly at first, but when the story reached the United States in 1897, newspapers ignited the public's imagination. Almost overnight, tens of thousands of people, farmers, clerks, laborers, and dreamers dropped everything and rushed north in hopes of striking it rich. Most had no experience in the Arctic and carried impossible loads of supplies over dangerous mountain passes into Alaska before continuing toward the Klondike. Routes like the Chilkoot Pass became legendary for their treacherous climbs, freezing temperatures, and long lines of exhausted prospectors hauling gear. Alaska's towns transformed instantly. Skagway exploded in population, becoming a hub of activity, crime, and opportunity. Entrepreneurs opened saloons, boarding houses, supply stores, and transport services. Some became rich, not by mining gold, but by selling goods to miners who desperately needed equipment. Jack London drew inspiration from this era, later writing stories that captured the harsh beauty and unforgiving nature of the North. Although the richest deposits were across the Canadian border, Alaska became the gateway. After the Klondike Rush subsided, new gold strikes in Nome and Fairbanks kept the fever alive for decades. Entire communities rose and fell based on rumors of new deposits. Gold changed Alaska's future forever. It brought permanent settlers, economic growth, new laws, and a stronger push for American governance. The gold rush also brought hardship to indigenous peoples as lands were disrupted and resources overused. Still, it secured Alaska's reputation as a frontier of opportunity and adventure. And long after the rush ended, the idea of Alaska as a place where fortunes could be made remained part of its identity. During World War II, Alaska's remote position suddenly became strategically vital. The Pacific Theater brought danger closer than anyone expected, and Alaska became a frontline defense point for the United States. The U.S. military began rapidly building airfields, bases, and new infrastructure across the territory. One of the most significant projects was the Alaska Highway, a massive construction effort linking Alaska with the continental United States through Canada. Thousands of workers, many of them African American soldiers, whose contributions were historically overlooked, cut through forests, mountains, and swamps to complete the highway in less than a year. In 1942, the war reached Alaska directly when Japanese forces attacked the Aleutian islands of Attu and Kiska. These were the first wartime occupations of American soil since the 1800s. Harsh weather, fog, and rugged terrain made the Aleutian campaign extremely challenging. And although details remain less discussed in history books, Alaska played a critical role in protecting the West Coast and managing Pacific operations. Indigenous people in the Aleutians were relocated for safety, with many facing difficult conditions in camps far from home. After the war, some villages were never rebuilt. Alaska's role in World War II highlighted its strategic importance. With the rise of the Cold War, the military expanded operations even further, installing radar stations and monitoring airspace that sat only miles from Soviet territory. The war accelerated development, opened new transportation routes, and introduced Alaska to the rest of the United States in a way that no gold rush or explorer ever had. Suddenly, Alaska was not just a distant wilderness, it was a critical part of national security. This shift laid the foundation for Alaska's path toward statehood, proving that the territory was far too important to remain politically isolated any longer. The next major turning point came in 1968, when one of the largest oil fields in North America was discovered at Prudhoe Bay on Alaska's North Slope. This discovery changed everything. After years of debate, engineering challenges, and environmental concerns, the U.S. approved construction of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline System TAPS, stretching 800 miles from Prudhoe Bay to the port of Valdez. The pipeline crossed mountains, rivers, and permafrost, requiring innovative solutions such as elevated sections to prevent ground damage. Thousands of workers flooded into Alaska, transforming towns like Fairbanks and Anchorage into booming urban centers. The pipeline brought jobs, revenue, and global attention. For Alaska natives, the discovery of oil led to major political negotiations. The Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act of 1971 granted indigenous corporations control of millions of acres of land and financial compensation, reshaping the economic landscape. By the time oil began flowing in 1977, Alaska was on the brink of unprecedented wealth. Oil revenue funded schools, roads, healthcare, and infrastructure across the state. The Alaska Permanent Fund was created to invest a portion of the earnings, later leading to the famous Permanent Fund dividend that pays eligible residents annually. Yet oil also raised complex issues: environmental risks, debates over drilling in fragile ecosystems like the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, and economic dependence on a resource that fluctuates in price. The pipeline era reshaped Alaska's identity from frontier wilderness to a crucial energy center for the United States. Though the oil fields peaked decades ago, the industry still plays a central role in Alaska's economy. The discovery at Prudhoe Bay proved that Seward's icebox was hiding riches beyond imagination, forever altering the state's financial and political future. Alaska officially became the 49th state of the United States on January 3, 1959. But the path to statehood was long and filled with debate. For decades, Alaskans argued that territorial status left them without representation, control over natural resources, or the ability to make decisions for their own communities. Statehood supporters worked tirelessly, highlighting Alaska's economic potential, strategic military importance, and cultural uniqueness. When Congress finally approved admission, celebrations erupted across the territory. Becoming a state brought new responsibilities, challenges, and opportunities. Alaska began building modern institutions, expanding education, and improving infrastructure. Anchorage grew into a bustling city, while smaller towns found new life through fishing, tourism, and local enterprise. Indigenous communities gained stronger political voices, using corporations and tribal organizations to protect cultural practices and manage land. In the modern era, Alaska remains a place unlike any other. Its landscapes attract millions of visitors each year. Glaciers, mountains, fjords, and wildlife that exist on a scale difficult to imagine. The state faces ongoing issues such as climate change, which melts permafrost, reshapes coastlines, and affects traditional hunting patterns. Alaska also plays a major role in national defense, with bases monitoring the Arctic and Pacific regions. Culturally, Alaska is a blend of indigenous heritage, pioneer spirit, and modern innovation. From the Iditarod Trail sled dog race to the vibrant art of native carvers and storytellers, Alaska celebrates traditions both ancient and evolving. Though remote, it remains deeply connected to global discussions about energy, environment, and identity. Alaska's story continues to unfold, shaped by the land, the people, and the challenges of living at the edge of the world. It is a place where history is written not only through past events, but through the daily resilience of those who call it home. As our journey through Alaska's past comes to an end, we are reminded that this vast northern land is far more than a place on the map. It is a living record of human courage, natural power, and constant transformation. From the first ancient footsteps that crossed Beringia to the rise of indigenous cultures that mastered the harshest environments on Earth, to the clash of empires and the chaotic energy of the gold rush, every chapter left its mark on the last frontier. Wars were fought on its remote islands, pipelines cut across its wilderness, and generations worked, endured, and dreamed beneath its endless skies. Yet through every era of conflict, change, and opportunity, Alaska has remained defiantly wild, a land where nature still leads and humans must learn to follow. Today it stands as a symbol of resilience, culture, and breathtaking beauty, an intersection of ancient tradition and modern ambition. Its history continues to evolve with every sunrise over its glaciers, every story shared in its villages, and every challenge faced in a rapidly changing world. Alaska is not just a story of the past, it is a promise of the future, a reminder that even in the coldest, most remote corners of the earth, the human spirit can find meaning, purpose, and home. If this journey moved you, inspired you, or opened your eyes to the incredible legacy of America's northern frontier, make sure to like the video, share it, and subscribe for more powerful stories that explore the world's hidden histories.